We should be connected here in just a moment. But I can read the chat and I can see Miroslav having a good time at my expense. Okay. Well, it finally just connected. It took a little longer than usual. Although I've been away for a little while, huh? So it's good to see you all. Definitely missed everybody. I just had a lot of work I had to do, and I still do, but I had even more the last several months than usual. So I had to do what I had to do. I tried to stay busy, of course, in different ways, get some uploads that I think or thought you would enjoy, and several more still coming that I think you'll enjoy. So you can look forward to those, but we're going to do 2 live shows. We got one today and one tomorrow. Today is, of course, a text reading. And, to me, they're the most important show that I do. Well, probably, right? I mean, you could make an argument for the pre-Christian evidence that Jesus is the biblical Messiah. But again, that's based on the Bible, right? So without understanding the Bible, we wouldn't be able to make those videos. And yet, in spite of that, the text readings are the least popular, right? Or you know what? Maybe that it just really shows who's dialed into the same thing, right? We're not all on the same level of interest, and by saying maybe it represents a smaller, more interested group, I'm not trying to be exclusive, right? Anybody can watch the videos and show they're interested more in the text. Or maybe they just don't like me, right? But either way, right, so we probably do get a lot more Trinitarians that'll watch my Trinitarian videos because they want to see what I have to say. They want to know what they're going to be dealing with other people, or just they want to be on the level of awareness of what we're talking about so they don't get stumped. Maybe. They still get, there's nothing they can do. We're not trying to hide our arguments. It's pretty much just what the text clearly teaches. A couple, examples that are more difficult than the rest, but none of which in any way involve the meanings that Trinitarians bring to the text, right? So it's not just the technical issues and discussions that matter. It's what do you mean by that, right? We need to understand each other. Sometimes we use terms that others don't fully understand, or in ways that maybe we don't make as clear as we should. And certainly Trinitarians definitely fit into that last category, at least when it comes to terms like God, or anything really having to do with the divinity, right? Like I pointed out in my Colossians 2:9 video. Okay. Looks like we're here. Yes, man. I'm very happy to see you all. Hopefully it's a good time. Sandy, first in today. Good to see you, Sandy. And I love getting your emails and all the links you send me. I get them. I just can't respond, of course, to all of them, but always send me what you got. I know you have a good eye for things that are very interesting. And of course, we have GL, the double blue hearts. That's very cool. I just didn't think of seeing blue hearts, but that looks pretty good. I guess unless it represents ice, right? You don't want to have an ice cold heart. Of course, only you can determine your heart, right? I've been around people, they try to tell me, oh, you don't feel this way, or, you have this kind of heart. And I'm like, what are you, psychic? Do you have some power or ability I don't understand? Because, first of all, everything you're saying is totally incorrect, right? Like we wear all of our emotions out on our sleeve every time, and we're always supposed to be a certain way, or we don't have a certain set of feelings for a certain personality type. A lot of people, what they do is they just project their emotions, right, onto another person. And that's why when sometimes someone says something like that represents an inner feeling you have and it doesn't connect or make sense, you might want to wonder whether or not that's the condition of that person. Projection is very common today. I've been noticing more and more. Or maybe, yeah, I mean, it's probably always been there to the same extent or similar, although I don't know. With all the social media and influences, probably it's higher than, we'll say, normal pre-social media becoming normative, or as normative as it is now. There's still a lot of people that are on the same applications or the internet and stuff, but there are so many who are. The level of influence is pretty high and has been for at least a decade, right? More than before, in ways different than before, to an extent certainly different than before. But that's what lets us come together, right? So it's not all bad. It's just influence. And like with anything else, if you don't watch your influence, right, whether it's your own self, whether it's the people around you, your friends, your family, right? What did Jesus say? I know we all know it, right? I know we all know what I'm talking about, and that's the text where he says, unless you leave your father, your brother, your sister, your mother, or he that does not love me more than his sister, his mother, his brother, we'll look it up real quick, is not my follower, right? Or can't be my follower. So, and we all know how Jesus was, right? He loved his family. He's not talking about not loving your family. That's completely opposite of how he actually acted and taught, right? Honor your father and your mother. Love your neighbor, or the one next to you, which would have to include your family, first of all, as yourself. We say neighbor, but it really just is the person next to you, which could be your neighbor. Your neighbor could be your family. Either way, there's nothing that suggests that putting him first in that way meant that you were not to love your family. Quite the opposite, right? Like we see in Paul. In the New Testament, Paul says, if you don't take care of your household, you're not even as good as an unbeliever, right? Which means what? You have a responsibility as a parent, specifically in that case, a father, but any parent really, right? And probably both in Paul's mind there. It just depends on the circumstances domestically he was dealing with, and whether or not one or the other or both were equally involved with the taking care of the household, right? But he's dealing with people who, in many respects, are trying to qualify for different levels of service. These positions, right? Elder, servant, those are lower positions. They don't make you higher. Oh, show me that in the text. I'll show you Jesus against any example you can show me, and how he showed all of them, directly or by example, that you are to lower yourself and become one's servant if you want to be the greatest among you. To the point of washing someone's feet, literally. All right, so these terms, right? Sometimes people may say, well, Christian witnesses of Jaho, you guys, yeah, you have your three things and all that. And you got people all over the world, but what about your structure, right? What about your elders or your servants? What about them? We don't have this direct appointment ceremony. You want to be a servant as a Christian witness of Jaho? Be a servant. You want to be an elder? Okay. Go ahead. It seems like the work outline for you is pretty clear. And if it's not clear in Paul or the other New Testament letters, just look at the Messiah, like I referenced a moment ago. And then you will become an elder, a servant. No one even has to refer to you in that way unless they choose, right? By your actions in doing so, someone will ask someone, hey, who's your elder? Henry. Well, who's a servant in your congregation? Betsy, right? Betsy might be an elder, right? Of course, we're not talking about limitations in terms of male and female. We understand that the New Testament pretty clearly teaches that men are supposed to take the lead, are supposed to be in these positions. But if men are not up to doing it, or ready to do it, then the women who are need to do it and set an example so that it incites the men who should be doing it to do it. And then the women will have their reward not only in doing what they should have done, but in getting the ones who should do it to do it. You don't think the Father would like that, right? Do you think the Father would like the Father or the Son, right? Same thing. Not same person, but you know what I mean. Same will. Right? One's will, one's doing the other's will. I know we're talking a little bit pre-show, but I haven't seen you guys in a while, right? Why not? We'll get to the text read in a moment. So, we were talking about servants, elders, things like this. I can't imagine how pleased, because it's something they'd be so pleased with, I believe, beyond what I can appreciate. When the Father and the Son see women making men become better men, and then, of course, men loving women and treating them with respect the way they should be treated. But we've each become more antagonistic in some respects, or just failed in the headship quest, right? Which is pretty clearly laid out for us, right? Who's the head of God? Nobody. Who's the head of the Christ? God. Who's the head of man? Christ. Who's the head of the woman? Man. Does that mean women can't submit to the Christ or pray through the Christ directly to the Father? No, of course not. That's not what it says at all. It's an arrangement that's meant to benefit us all. We'll talk about it more in another show, but we kind of got off on it for different reasons that I think are important, right? We need to be able to recognize in ourselves and in our small but growing community the different things that each of us may need to do or see others do or recognize can be done without anyone having to tell us, hey, you're one, right? Just why don't you just do the things that it says? Seems to me that's the best way to become whatever it is you become when you do those things. Not by someone appointing you because you just went to a number of meetings or did a number of things, right? You actually just started becoming the thing. It seems to me the best way to be anything, really. So with that in mind, Everett, right? What do you think of when you think of Everett? Same thing, right? So, because we can tell, right? We can tell by just our limited association through our shared beliefs, right? Whether it's Betsy in the Middle East or India, whether it's Miro in Europe, right? Whether it's Everett in the United States, whether it's any number of people in South America or Canada. And I don't mean to leave out any country, certainly not Asia or Australia, right? Or Africa. Should I say Antarctica too? My point is, I like our group. I think we do the things we need to do and we don't burden each other in ways that many other groups do. And that's their right. Hey, if they want to do it, like we're going to talk about tomorrow, right? Tomorrow's show's the big one, you could say. To me, this is the most important. We're going to start in like 1 minute. Let me just wrap this up. But tomorrow, when we talk about Watchtower Society and Watchtower people, Jehovah's Witnesses associated with Watchtower, right? I think you should be pretty happy that I'm the one doing this show tomorrow. You may not like anything, of course, negative, right? Many of you don't, anyway. Some of you are more balanced. Some of you fully recognize the issues. And I think probably most, if not all of you, recognize there are issues. You know that, right, Watchtower people? This won't be the first time you realize you've got some issues. Whether you think we're correct or others are correct or you're correct about those issues, everyone has to decide, right? But I think you at least recognize, if we're going to just talk to each other reasonably or try, there are some issues historically and currently with your organization's structure and teachings. There are a lot of good things too. I've acknowledged that and I've defended probably the most important things you believe, other than, of course, about the Watchtower Society. But we all know this, so I'm not going to get into it too much. Hey, thanks again, BJ. I do appreciate it. And I appreciate all you very much just being here. We'll start the show in just a minute, I know. Muriel's like, come on, Greg, I came for the text reading. Hey, you can watch that later, but I haven't seen you guys in like a month or more. And either way, just kind of leading into the show and into tomorrow, I'm not going to hammer away at the Watchtower. No, it's not going to be from the Watchtower's perspective or loyal members. It's not going to be everything you want to hear. So you don't have to listen, right? You already kind of know the things I don't agree on. So it's not like it's a huge surprise, is it? So unless you just fully believe that the society is absolutely 100% to be trusted no matter what, then probably you'll understand where I'm coming from tomorrow and agree with many of the things, some of the things at least. If you 100% trust everything the Watchtower does, and you always will and you always have, well, or whether or not you always have, if you completely trust the Watchtower, right, like Loesch said, or at least you trust them, the governing body, Loesch. I'm not going to get into him extendedly, right, but that's a big thing, right, complete trust. And to say in the same breath, essentially, God and Jesus completely trust them, so why don't you? You know, I mean, what are you talking about? Because no, that's absolutely not true. And quite honestly, Watchtower loyalists, to me, that type of thing, right? All the other stuff is important. 1914, 1918, the blood issue, all that. But when you tell us to completely trust anybody, but especially people who have made mistakes and changed a lot, right? You admit that. We know that's true. We disagree on the extent or significance. We'll talk about it tomorrow. To ask anybody to completely trust you would require you to have a belief about yourself and about the other people you want to trust you that is absolutely against the explicit teachings of the Bible. And so if you're going to go to Trinitarians and say, hey, one God the Father, right, word for word, like we do, difference is you are facing the same problem as the Trinitarians on another issue. We're not. And we'll talk about it more tomorrow. And I'm not going to make it so negative that you're I'm going to be like I always am, like I always have been. I look at things as they are. I learn like you and everybody else does, right? Especially with religious groups. Nobody knows everything at the start or for a while, depending on your involvement or what your focus is or what you're exposed to. Nobody should be expected to always see everything correctly at a particular time. But if over time, and after considerable exposure to things, you still reject an explicit teaching of the text, well, would God's people do that as a whole? It seems odd to me to even ask in that way. But we'll talk about it tomorrow. So let's do our text reading. Okay. Do our split screen. That's NWT. Huh? We might need that. I don't know. NWT is good. I got more in NWT. It's not I've never said it's perfect, right? People freak out. I do positive shows, right, to counter all the negative stuff. Right? It's not like the NWT is the first Bible to ever use the divine name, even Jehovah. Right? Look at the ASV. It uses it all throughout the Old Testament. Now, the NWT uses it in the New Testament, and the ASV doesn't. But there are other New Testaments that have used it in the the divine name in the New Testament, or look at the J document references. Still, the NWT, is by far, in my opinion, collectively better than any other modern translation when it comes to the divine name. When it comes to texts that are translated according to the text and the beliefs of the text and not according to what's next. Right? We got Trinitarian Bibles, and by Trinitarian Bibles, I mean Bibles either translated by Trinitarians or Bibles translated for Trinitarians. Because as we know, I had someone challenge me and say, hey, no, they're not Trinitarian Bibles. They're just Bibles translated that support the Trinity. No. Many of your Bibles were translated by Trinitarians. And many that weren't, that are consistent, let's say, for example, that translate John 1:1, God, capital G-O-D, even though I don't think that's consistent with the Trinity, but whatever. They know who they're translating for. Why? Look at Palmer. Edwin Palmer of the NIV Committee regarding the divine name, like I talked about in part 1 of my NWT videos, NWT superiority videos. Does it look like he was translating according to what he believes should be done according with the divine name? Or does it look like he was influenced by tradition, like he explicitly said he was, and by what it would cost them monetarily? In other words, whether Palmer is a Trinitarian or not, and I believe he is, but he could have been one at one time, or one more time, or never been one. Either way. I'm not like a big devotee of Palmer, or even that interested, right? I've looked at some of the things he's written in his letter, of course, and I've looked into the NIV, but him as an individual, whether he believes in the Trinity or not, or just like with the divine name, he has shown us that he will translate according to his audience, is what I'm getting at, regardless of what Palmer believes. He understood what his audience believed, right? And he wasn't going to translate John 1:1, a God. No way. Not after what he said about the divine name. Even if he believed it should be a God. And that may not be true. By the way, Everett, thank you very much. I appreciate that. So, Bibles, the majority of English modern Bibles, I would say, are either Trinitarian, by Trinitarians, or for Trinitarians. Now, you could have other Bible, you could even have people translate it, and they're maybe a oneness person. So they're translating John 1:1 as capital G-O-D, the word was God. But they know that Trinitarians will still either read that as the Trinity or as a person of the Trinity. Or maybe they just hope they'll think of it in the oneness sense in which it's meant. Either way, those instances, it's not like Trinitarians are running around being confused very often by John 1:1 translated, the word was God, capital G-O-T. Right? They pretty much, that's going to flow with the Trinity, even though it really doesn't, but doesn't matter. We've talked about it. They're going to read the Trinity into it anyway. But it's a lot easier to do with something they're more familiar with and that is consistent with there being one God, even though, again, once you go through it all, it doesn't add up or make sense. It's just easier. It avoids other things that could be a problem for them. Either way, although I would think, speaking for Trinitarians, I would think they would want to go with a term like divine, which is why they like to go push the qualitative issue so much. But that doesn't change the fact that it's an actual singular noun applied to a subject. And so it's not like an abstraction, right? It's not like love. God is love. Well, that's different from the word was theos. The word, and well, some people might argue, I'm talking to Trinitarians right now, okay? People who don't believe that Jesus pre-existed, I'm not really talking to you right now. Not in this sense that I'm talking about John 1:1. I thank you, Studies in the Scriptures. I appreciate that. So, the point I was getting to basically, though, is that the majority of Bibles are Trinitarian, by or for. And the New World Translation knew that. Just like Edwin Palmer knew the majority of people wanted to see what they see in the King James. The NWT, the original committee, and the people leading up to the production of the NWT and its editing at least through the late 80s. The latest edition that I'm thoroughly familiar with being the 1984 edition. But many of those same people were still around into the late 80s and probably early 90s. But nevertheless, to do what they did and to the extent that they published it, and of course, Watchtower people, you get credit, or the people who were before you get some credit for at least showing an evangelistic spirit and spreading texts like the NWT and many of the proper translations, the divine name, all that. You get credit. A lot of people get credit for stuff, right? I will. You can find many things to credit Catholics for, different Protestant groups for, right? I mean, when it comes to things like charity, well, for example, Watchtower people, right? It's almost like your use of the divine name, and many others groups not. And yet the Bible heavily emphasizes taking care of the poor, not just those familiar to you, also others, Good Samaritan, other texts. So we need to be prepared to recognize, right, when we talk about the fruits of the people that would be God's people, or Christians, like Jesus said, that's in one sense kind of easy, but in another sense, not so easy if you're going to try to make your group exclusive, and yet you don't have all of the fruits or signs the Bible talks about. And that's what we'll talk about a little bit tomorrow. We'll talk about the fruits you do have, the things that show maybe you are God's people as an organization, right? Even though this concept, in some respects, is not really correct, but let's just go with it for now, and based on your understanding of the prophecies related to the organization in terms of their understanding of 1914, 1919, let's just look at it that way for now. Let's look at the fruits that might show you're this special people, and the fruits you don't have. Wouldn't those also be important? I think so, right? If you don't have some fruits you're actually supposed to have, well, what's going on? And other people do. Okay, and then you have some and they don't? Okay. Well, what about the things we're told not to do? Might those be a deciding factor for both sides? Some groups are doing some things they're supposed to do and not. The other groups are doing some things they're supposed to do and not. Who's doing what they're not supposed to be doing? Those aren't fruits. We got fruits, we got missing fruits, and we got non-fruits. We're not talking about homo fruits. Don't worry, homos. I know many homos, and they openly declare themselves to be fruits. So if it bothers you, that's really your problem. You're the homos, right? We accept that. We're okay with you being homos as long as you don't do something to someone against their will. If you want to abuse yourself and another homo, that's okay, at least in the USA. But please stop lying to yourselves and others and pretending it's love. There's no abuse in love, and you male homos abuse each other in many ways I'm not going to get into right now, but that I have before. And you females do the same thing, emotionally and physically. It's all documented. You can look it up yourselves. Lesbos are the fastest ending adult human relationship on the planet. So good luck to you if you believe in that sort of thing. Okay, text reading. I know. But like I said, I've been wanting to see and talk to you guys. Let's see, what do I have here? Split screen. Good. I'll put myself in. Okay, back to this for a minute. Put that. Oh, yeah. Just one little thing here. It's always something, I know. Just do this real quickly and we'll get going. Okay, finally. So I'll just if I decide to clip the pre-show, I might keep it, or maybe I'll clip parts of it for a separate video. We'll see. Either way, in case I want to keep the text readings more sequential, then this will give me a starting point. Welcome to Text Readings with Greg Stafford, where today we're going to be reading texts that I've translated from the Hebrew and Greek texts, the book of Psalms, chapter 34, verses 16 through 22, chapter 37, verses 3 through 6, and chapter 40, verses 3 through 4. The reason it's sort of broken up like that is because I haven't translated all of the Psalms, and I'm still making changes to this date. But by doing text readings and using the material I've translated to date, I get to go over what I've done. And for example, in this case, I was able to find that I had actually put the brackets on some of the verse differences between the Greek and Hebrew different than they should be. And so I corrected that. I've made the changes and put them in the description of the text readings in the description below. And I'll also be making those changes to the Christian Witnesses of Jah website, where I host my translations to date a little later on. So if you're keeping my copies of translations, you might want to go back into the site, maybe tomorrow, and copy the text readings we're going to do today, because there'll be a little bit of some differences, so that now I have the numbering correct. And I also reviewed the translation since I was there, going through the material again, and I made a couple very minor, more so stylistic changes that reduced the overall wording, but not the meaning of the text. All right, so let me bring up our texts from Psalms chapters 34, 37, and 40. We'll be taking a look at them in pairings, right? So we're going to start with chapter 34, and we're going to be reading the Hebrew, and then immediately following the verse in Hebrew, the translation from Hebrew, we're going to read the Greek translation. So you'll be able to see each verse as it's translated in the Greek, from the Greek and Hebrew, according to how I understand it, and the differences that I recognized and felt important enough to make. In many cases, they're basically the same. In some cases, there's just minor differences. There are times when there are some significant differences, like additional text material in the Greek text that we have, the best ones, and the Hebrew text we have. In those cases, I've put minus or plus signs, depending on which has more or less text, next to the Greek or Hebrew indicators, and italicized the different part of the text when you compare it to the other translation. So you'll be able to see by looking at each text, first, where one has more or less material, if that's the case. Sometimes there's more words in the original language, but they're basically saying the same thing. So it might look like there's more text sometimes, but they're saying the same thing. So I'm not making that an indicator or any more expressive or related words that make the same point different. It has to be really different, an addition or a subtraction from material in one text or another, at least to the best that I can recognize it. So, and at times I put some bracketed material in our text readings. I won't be doing that in my published translation. In my online version, there's separate notes. Sometimes I use bracketed material in the text if I want it to flow and I don't want you breaking away. In the published translation, though, it's all notes if there's anything different. There might be some bracketed terms, like the divine name in the Greek translation, because in the Greek text that I'm translating, the divine name isn't used, even though it's used in some Septuagint texts, into first century Septuagint texts like 4Q Leviticus B. And I'll note that in the text where the divine name is used in those Greek fragments or texts that we have. But if I'm translating a specific text, like in the New Testament, right? The New Testament manuscripts I'm translating don't have the divine name other than in Revelation 19, the abbreviated form. So even though I know the original text used the divine name where they were quoting the divine name, unless you're going to argue the New Testament writers misquoted the Hebrew or Aramaic text to the Jews. I don't think so. And of course, again, all end of first century Septuagint translations of the Old Testament have the divine name. So even if they were quoting from the Greek text, like Paul, there would be a form of the divine name in there. So there's really no basis to argue they didn't use it. We don't have the text that show it, right? We don't have the originals. But again, what did the original source they're quoting have? Unless you have a really good argument, like they're expressly changing what they're quoting, then they quoted what was in the text that we can show was in the text during the time they wrote their text. Next. So other than that, but here you might see a couple things. Like I've added a few extra terms that we'll go back to and review. So not everything you're seeing right here will be exactly as it's either in the online version or the printed version. The printed version will be different than all of them because I'm going to make it as clean as possible. Only essential notes. And there will also be an appendix on Jesus as the wisdom of Proverbs 8, the Messiah of Micah 5, whose going forths are long ago. Just like wisdom of Proverbs 8:35. Okay. Psalm 34. Let's start in the Hebrew, verse 15. And there's a 16 there because that's where the verse begins in the Greek text, like you can see below it. And then I have verse 15 in brackets, so you know that the Hebrew text, it's verse 15. And I had to change this, like I mentioned earlier, because I had it a little off. For some reason, I just didn't have it sequencing properly. I've corrected it here and in the description, and I'm going to correct it in my online version later on. This is of the Psalms, though. I'm not nearly finished with Psalms, and I have a lot of editing still to do. It's nowhere like Proverbs, right? Proverbs I've been through many times. And so it's pretty much ready to go. In Psalms, it's what I've reviewed, it's what I've produced, but it's not my final product. Verse 15, chapter 34, Hebrew. I was going to say hi to everyone. Let me go ahead and do that. Miroslav, Sandy, GL, BJ, Ryan, Everett, Japheth, Jason White, Studies in the Scriptures, Siktaras. Japheth asks the question, why don't you start your own church? Because we belong to the Church of Christ, the congregation of the firstborn who's been enrolled in the heavens. We don't need a new church. We sometimes need to designate ourselves differently than other groups because they have their own churches or their own names and their own sets of beliefs that aren't all based on the Bible in our view. So unfortunately today, Christian alone won't really cut it. It might cut it among Christians, but not among everyone else. So we don't need to start a new church, Japheth. I certainly don't want to. All we want to do is follow the beliefs of the text. The clear beliefs of the text, the main three. One God the Father, Jahoah, Yah-oh. His Son the Messiah, the sent forth Savior. The risen King sitting on his Father's throne. And treating each other the way we want to be treated. The golden rule that puts you above hypocrisy to the extent you can do it. That's it, Japheth. The rest is up to you. It's not that there's not correct or incorrect views on other things. We're not going to judge you unless you start making an issue over things that compromises our three primary beliefs in Jah, Jesus, and you and me. Because we believe, if you believe those things the way we do and for the reasons we do, then you should be trusted to make the rest of your own decisions and be judged accordingly. For example, the eyes of Jehovah, Jahoah, as I transliterate and I've explained before, even though Jehovah has some elements that's correct, we use Jahoah, or at least I do, because it's a form of the divine name in an anglicized version that has utility, right? We believe essentially the divine name, tetragrammaton, trigrammaton, were both pronounced originally Yah'o or Jaho in an anglicized form. But we also recognize the potential for a final aspirant, and whether it's people wanting to use the Masoretic text, which I don't think is the best evidence, but not in terms of vowel pointing the divine name, but we'll get to it, and or the use of a final aspirant on the divine name in certain poetic sections, although they also go with Yah'o, or as a result of certain forms of terms we have in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I don't think it's sufficient to justify this final aspirant as definitively a part of the original pronunciation of the full form of the divine name. But I realize it's something we have to get used to, so this is a divine name form that has utility. You can say Jaho, or you can say Jahoah. And of course, we also know we're Christian witnesses of Jah because that's the least controversial form used in both the Old and New Testaments, and so it's really above controversy in our opinion. The eyes of Jahoah look in the direction of the righteous ones, and his ears listen to their cry for help. The eyes of Lord Jahoah, Greek translation, are upon the righteous one, and his ears are toward their cry for help. So like I was mentioning a moment ago, responding to Japheth's question, you're right, Japheth, there are not many other group options. We'll talk about it more tomorrow. I certainly understand your position in that regard when it comes to the type of beliefs that we have that uniquely define people like us. Use of the divine name, understanding one God the Father, recognizing Jesus as a separate firstborn son, the Messiah sent forth. I do understand that. We have to go forward, right? We have to deal with difficulties we have. It certainly isn't beyond our ability to resolve. So, and I think here, this should be 18. You can see right here, like I was talking about, no matter whether you think you're lonely or alone, you're not. Just like Elijah, just like Elisha or others, just like people of God from many different times who didn't always have a lot of people. Doesn't make a difference where he's concerned. It might be more difficult for us at different times. That's true. And that's just life. Life is not always going to be easy. And it's really not always as difficult as we make it either, is it? If you really look at it, right, if all we're complaining about is that we don't have a large enough group or we don't have as many friends, yeah, that can be a problem, especially if you're a very social person. Right? Different people are different. Not everybody can just exist on their own or with one other person. There are different personalities. There are different people that have different social needs. So we have to be aware of that. Whether we're a social person who may not recognize that certain people can do things with fewer people or on their own, or whether we're someone who's with fewer people or on our own, and we don't fully understand why certain people need to be with so many other people. Because we're not them and they're not us and we're different. And if we don't like being around certain people, then it's our decision to do something different or to accept them as they are and deal with it. It's just who they are. It's not something they need to change to stop hurting someone. People are allowed to be who they are, and you might not always like it. It doesn't give you the right to feel like things are bad, right? That's just the way things are sometimes. And you have to move forward and change your mindset so that you don't linger in this, we'll call it negativity. But I do understand it's certainly more enjoyable when you have people around you. But what kind of people? What are they doing? What are they influencing you to do? Are you just enjoying having more people? Well, that's not what Jesus did. That's certainly not what many figures in the Bible did. And it's certainly not something we're told to do. Compromise our beliefs in God or the Messiah or the Bible or about people just to have more friends, just to be among more people. That's not a Bible teaching. That's not something the Bible encourages ever. Just the opposite, right? So even though friends, even though having more people is a good thing, there are many examples of it being a good thing in the Bible too. It can also be bad, and if it compromises our core understanding of who we are as an individual and who God is, why we're here, well, then let's just be honest, right? We care more about people and being socially satisfied than the truth. Eyes of Lord Jaho are upon the righteous, and he will listen to them. Verse 16, Hebrew, chapter 34, the face, dignified plural of paneh, right? We've talked about the plural of majesty, the plural of dignification, plural of emphasis, right? There's different ways of referring to it. But that's not a literal plural, right? It's never translated as a literal plural in even English translations, or in this case, the Greek translation, right? It's the face, singular. And I believe, do I have it here? Let me see. Verse 16, Rolf's edition, prosopon. Prosopon de kyriou, epipoiuntas. Singular. It's not plural. The Hebrew is plural. It's a plural of paneh. But that's the dignified, that's a use of Hebrew Semitic plurals like we've talked about on this show before, and at least 2 videos, and then in other videos as well. And I have a whole video I'm going to do about the plural of majesty versus literal plurals in the Bible and Trinity Conflict series. But Trinitarians, right? If it really was a plural, this is the type of term, right? Face, person, what the term means basically. That's what Trinitarians should want to be a literal plural. But they never translate texts like this literal plurals because they know they're not literal plurals, just like the Greek translator knew that. Because the writers of the Hebrew text understood how they use plurals in a dignified or majestic way, or for emphasis, right? For not just people, not just for royal people either, but for even non-living or non-personal things. So Trinitarians just misapply or misunderstand the use of plurals, like in Genesis 1, Elohim, and potentially even for a text right here. Again, even though they don't translate this, right? If it's not a literal plural, then there aren't more than one person that is God. It says right here, the face of Yaho, Jaho. So he's one person, Trinitarians. We already know this, by the way, right? Galatians 3:20. God is one. So he can't be the mediator and a party to the contract. That's why he has a mediator, the Son, between him and Christians, right? And in the same way, he had a mediator, Moses, and the Hebrews. He couldn't be both because he's only one person, Trinitarians. Just like it says right here. Just like your Bibles translate correctly right here. Because it's a dignified plural, like the Greek text shows right here. The face of Jaho is among those doing bad, right? He's watching, right? And remember, Trinitarians in this whole plural stuff, right here in verse 15, 16, Greek, Hebrew, it uses the plural for eyes. Might use the dual construct here in the Hebrew, but in the Greek, it uses the plural for eyes and for ears. But not for face. Because they understood the use of the dignified or majestic plural as not a literal plural in this case, the face case. They did understand it in a plural or dual sense here. And that's reflected in their translation. The eyes and ears of Jahoah, right there among, they listen, they're toward the righteous one, but his face, his person is also among those doing bad. Why? Right here it's toward their cry for help, or his ears listen to their cry for help. Here, though, Jahoah, Yah'o, Jah, is among those doing bad to cut their memory, cut their memorials out of the earth. Greek text, the face of Lord Jahoah is against those who do what is bad or who work what is evil, to completely remove the memory of them from the earth. Nobody gets away with anything. Nobody. And if you think you do, if people think they're getting away with evil or badness, you got another thing coming. You cannot mock God. Well, you can think you can. You can try. You can do things that show you think you are. But everybody goes to the same place, like Solomon wisely said. And none of you are any different. You might want to think about that a little bit more than you seem to. Either way, we'll all find out. Verse 17, Hebrew text, chapter 34, they have cried out and Jahoah has heard them. Then he delivered them from all their distressing circumstances. Same verse, but verse 18 in the Greek text, the righteous cried out and Lord Jahoah heard them. And out of all their tribulation or suffering, he delivered them. Verse 18, Hebrew text, chapter 34, Jahoah is near to those with a broken heart or with a broken will, and those with spirit whose spirit has turned to dust or whose spirit is full of sorrow, he will save. Same verse, but verse 19, the Greek text, the Lord Jahoah is near to those with a broken heart or those with a bruised mind. And those humble or low in spirit, he will save. We have to also make sure we don't abuse ourselves, right? There are a lot of us, I think, who may project, like I talked about earlier in the pre-show, this negativity that really is unjustified. That really, upon reflection and logical thinking, doesn't connect with the facts. It's just a feeling. And feelings are not facts. You can feel incredibly upset going into a performance. That does not mean it's going to be bad, or that your feeling of upsetness is justified. It's just happening to yourself, and you can choose to project it or accept it and live your life. And so, while we do recognize Jahoah as toward those with a broken mind and spirit, and maybe sometimes our mind is so fractured and broken based on our experience that maybe we project because we're so weak we can't help it. Well, then that's just something you have to deal with, right? It's not really fair to overly affect other people with a broken spirit. Now, if you're very low and you're very bruised in your mind or heart, you need help. People need help. But you also need to accept that help. You need to rely on Jahoah. You need to show faith so that we can all come together and heal the best way possible. Verse 19, chapter 34, Hebrew text, many unpleasant or injurious things fall upon the righteous one. We know that, right? We know something bad that happens to us is not a sign of Jahoah always punishing us, right? He may let punishment come because of our actions. But sometimes when we feel like it's being intentionally done to us, that is negative actions, who should we blame and why? The devil, right? Who's the one roaring and walking around trying to devour people? Who's the one demanding that people like Peter and others be sifted like wheat? Who's the one that went to Job and then went to Jaho when he still had access to him before he was thrown out of heaven and dishonored his creator because of his arrogance and thinking that his will, his way was better? Who was it that took Job all the way to the point of death, right? Shattered all his material possessions, his will to live. You want to talk about a bruised mind? Do you really believe that happened to him? Well, then you need to gain strength from that account, right? No one had it worse than Job because no one had it better than Job and had it all taken away for doing nothing other than the right things. But someone else had authority over him at that time in a way that allowed that to occur. And it's more limited now. The Son is in authority, but he is also, in spite of being ruler of the kings of the earth, and of course over Satan himself, right? Rulers, thrones, authorities, powers, and angels were made subject to him. 1 Peter 3:22. Powers, authorities, angels, all that was made subject to him. And yet he has to allow this to occur. Why? Because we're all sinful. We have to be managed by these other entities that are also allowed to exist for a time during which all of us are exhibiting bad behavior on God's earth, and the Son is here to bring it to a completion. And that is what we believe will occur. So, just because we may be in a position like Job or with a bruised mind and we may trust in Jehovah, I've seen some people just say, I've cried out Jehovah, I've asked for help and nothing happens. Well, keep asking, keep knocking, and you will receive. That is also a text we must remember. It doesn't happen one time. It didn't happen one time to Job. We are all still sinners. Job was not perfect, although he was close, you could argue. So we get what we deserve. But we can rely on Jehovah and have confidence, trust in the Son. No human, we'll talk about it tomorrow, and get through any difficulty like Job did. And then be blessed and rewarded. Yeah, it's tough. We're not there yet, right? We're not kings yet. None of us have begun ruling as kings yet. Okay, we're going to have to suffer. It says right here, many unpleasant things fall upon the righteous one, but out of them all, Jaho will deliver them. Greek text, many are the tribulations of the righteous, and out of them all he will rescue them. Verse 20, Hebrew text, chapter 34, he, that is Jaho, is closely watching all the bones of the righteous one, so that not one of them has been broken. Right, we understand this messianically, and we'll get into this in another Pre-Christian Evidence, Jesus is the Biblical Messiah show. But this also can apply in a general sense to those whom Jehovah values and accepts, at least in the limited sense in which we can exist as sinful people, as righteous ones, right? Christ's righteousness is imputed to us because of our faith in him and recognition of him as the fulfillment of all the pre-Christian evidence that we talk about. Right here. Verse 21, Greek text, Lord Jaho is carefully guarding all their bones. Not one of them will be broken. Let me take a look at that. This might be something I need to correct here, and this would be important. Again, I have not fully edited the Psalms, right? This is, in fact, very good for me. You notice in that verse, right? Verse 20 of chapter 34 right here. I use he is closely. I don't see the divine name there. So I need to verify if Lord is used and if the divine name is used here. If so, I need to remove this bracketed representation. I probably got so used to using it for Lord, didn't recognize it wasn't in the Hebrew text. Let me check that while we're right here. Yeah, that does not use the divine name in the Hebrew text. So I need to remove that. It does use Kyrios in the Greek text. What would be Psalm 33 in for example, Rolf's edition. I should put that here too, right? So this would probably be better if I put 33 there. It would be in the translation online in there, but for this text here too, the Greek text is in chapter 33 of Rolf's. So put that there. And it only applies in this case to the present chapter. And I need to remove this here. I'm going to yellow it now so I can make this change in the description and in the online version. Of course, again, this is Psalms, so I'm not going to be printing this anytime soon because I have not finished Psalms. But I need to make corrections like this and make sure that my text, my translation represents, right? So that's good. We'll eliminate that. The Lord is carefully guarding all their bones. Not one of them will be broken. Very similar, although it is used more in a plural sense than in a general sense, or even a specific messianic sense. Verse 21, Hebrew text, chapter 34 or 33 in the Greek text. Evil, or what is bad, will kill the wicked one, and those with hatred for the righteous one will be found guilty. Same verse, but 22 in the Greek, chapter 33. The evil, 34 in the Hebrew, the evil belonging to sin is death, and those who disregard or who hate the righteous one will be found guilty. Nobody can get away with mistreating God's people or any individual righteous person whom God or the Messiah have designated as righteous, right? None of us are righteous in the complete sense. We can be recognized as righteous by them, right? Righteous in the sense that we're following what they say in spite of our imperfection. That does not mean we're to be completely trusted. There's a difference, and we will talk about it in our live show tomorrow. Okay, we read that. Verse 22, evil belonging to sin is death. Those who disregard the righteous one. Okay, well, this should be 22. Verse 22 of chapter 34, Jaho is redeeming the soul or the life of his servants. And not one out of all those who seek refuge in him will be found guilty. Same verse, but 23, chapter 33, Greek text. Lord Jaho will redeem the souls of his servants so that all those hoping in him may not be found guilty. Right, it's like with the high priest Joshua in the book of Zechariah, where he's purified, right? Let's bring that up, in fact, just to show by example of how this can be the case. Where this is such an important account, right? Because this is where the crown is put on his head. Satan even comes forth, right? Is so interesting. Right here. So you can see here, NWT, Zechariah, right? We're talking about how people can be basically cleansed, right? Not found guilty, even though we're all sinners. It's like, and this is in a pre-messianic sense. We understand the way it works with the New Testament in terms of our faith through Jesus and living our life according to the way he lived his, versus the system of sacrifices that were arranged through the Mosaic law. But notice right here, since our text reading is from the Psalms, right, the pre-New Testament text, in Zechariah 6, right, it's talking about the word of Jehovah continuing to occur Right? This is the angel. It says, the angel answered and said to me, 4 spirits of heaven are going forth, they've taken their station. Right? It says, he proceeded to crowd to me, saying, see, these are the ones going forth to this land. And then the word of Jehovah continued to occur, and it says, let there be a taking of something from the exiled people, even from Heldai and from Tobijah. And there's a question mark there, so I don't want to mispronounce that name. Some of my transliteration of the text in NWT I'm using didn't come through, so I can't make out that they replaced certain terms with question marks. It says it, and it says, you must come into the house, those with these who have come from Babylon. And right here, verse 11, you must take silver and gold and make a crown and put it on the head of Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest. And you must say to him, this is what Jehovah has said. Here is the man whose name is Sprout, right? He's prefiguring the Messiah, even though he's an imperfect, sinful person, as you're going to see explicitly in a minute. But it's the angel of Jaho. It's Michael, the archangel. It's the Prince of Israel, the one who's with Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and using him in this way to prefigure himself in at least my and other people's view. And that's why he's calling him Sprout, right? From his own place he will sprout, and he will certainly build the temple. And he says he himself will build the temple. He must, for his part, carry the dignity. He'll sit down and rule on his throne. He'll become a priest on his throne. The very council of peace will prove to be with him. And he refers to the grand crown. And he goes on to make these prophecies about, in relation to him and about what will occur. And let me just look here, find the exact verse. Yes, okay, so it happened right before the account. But so you saw what just happened with Joshua, right? Right before that event, that angel of Jaho, Michael, talking to Joshua about the crown. Earlier in chapter 3, it says the angel of Jehovah said to Satan, right? So we have Michael, the archangel, based on what we read in Jude, what we read in Exodus, and what we read in Joshua. We have Michael talking to Satan, saying, Jehovah rebuke you, right? Just like Jude depicts Michael saying relative to the death of Moses and his body. Jehovah rebuke you, O Satan. Yes, Jehovah rebuke you. He who is choosing Jerusalem, right? He's referring to Joshua, the high priest, standing before Jehovah, and Satan standing at his right hand to resist him. And then Michael, the archangel, the angel of Jaho, rebukes Satan and says, referring to Joshua, is this not a log snatched out of the fire? And it says, now as for Joshua, he happened to be clothed in befouled garments and stand before the angel. And then Michael says, remove the befouled garments from him. And then he says to Joshua, see, I have caused your error to pass from upon you. And there is a clothing of you with robes of state. Similar but different to the vision in Isaiah 6, where Isaiah is cleansed, right? When the angel takes the fire and touches his tongue. There is a means or something that can happen, even pre-messianic, that would remove their sin or cause their guilt to pass away, just like we read here in our text reading. Didn't mean, of course, they didn't need to be resurrected or have the Messiah, but it effectively, right, resurrection of the righteous and the unrighteous, it shows, right, who are we talking about here? The righteous. And yet they're not righteous, but they're righteous based on the things that they chose to do versus give in to the sin like Cain did. By contrast, you could look at someone like Joseph. Hence, resurrection of unrighteous and righteous, to be told, like Jesus says in John 5, resurrection to judgment, resurrection to life. Chapter 37, we're almost done. It was a little bit long in chapter 34, but we're getting close, and I wanted to kind of go into the Zechariah accounts to accent this whole not being found guilty concept, pre-messianic. 37, Hebrew, verse 3. They're both the same, Greek and Hebrew, numbering-wise here in chapter 37. You must trust in Jaho, and you must do good. Dwell in the earth and make faithfulness your friend. You must hope in the Lord Jaho, and you must do what is right. Live in the earth, and you will be cared for by the earth's abundance. Verse 4, be joyful over Jaho, and he will give you the good desires of your heart. Verse 4, Greek translation, you must take pleasure in Lord Jaho, and he will give you the good longings of your heart. Verse 5, Hebrew translation, chapter 37, you must commit your direction to Jaho, and you must trust in him. Then he will act on your behalf. Verse 5, Greek translation, you must reveal your way to Lord Jaho. You must hope in him, and he himself will bring it to pass. Verse 6, chapter 37, Hebrew translation, he will bring forth your righteousness like he brings forth the light. And he will bring forth your righteous judgment, bring forth righteous judgment for you like he brings forth the midday time. Verse 6, Greek translation, chapter 37, he will bring forth your righteousness as light, and your judgment like midday. Chapter 40, our last text reading chapter for today. Verse 3 in the Hebrew text. Then he will put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to God. Many will see and they will be afraid. Then they will trust in Jaho. This might be something I need to check here. Verse chapter 40. How is this? Okay, so this should be 39. And again, I will be, if I haven't completely made the change, I think this change needs to be made in the description of this video. And I will make this change, of course, to my online version on the Christian Witnesses of Jah forum. I'm still working through Psalms, so some of the numbering and sequencing and maybe some of the text wording will need to be edited. But we go through them nonetheless, in part for this very reason. And this should be verse 3. That's correct, but that should be brackets. All right, let's get this should be 3, and that is actually 4. All right, so we read the Hebrew text. Verse 4, the same as verse 3 in what is in Hebrew chapter 40 of Psalms, but in the Greek 39. Then he threw into my mouth a new song. Oh, let me read the Hebrew. I might have skipped that. No, I did read that. I'll read it again. Chapter 40, verse 3, Hebrew text. Then he put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to God. Many will see and they will be afraid, but then they will trust in Jaho. Chapter 39, verse 4, but the same as the text we just read in the Hebrew, now in Greek. Then he threw into my mouth a new song, a hymn to our God. Many will see and be made to fear, and they will hope in Lord Jaho. Last verse. Let me make sure we have it correct. Right in my little numbering sequences. Looks like I might need to do a little. Okay, so we're dealing with Hebrew 40, Greek 39 chapter. We're reading in our final verse, verse 4 of chapter 40 from the Hebrew text, which is verse 5 of chapter 39 in the Greek text. It'll all be clear in my translation, I promise. And here we go. Verse 4, chapter 40, Hebrew text. Happy is the one who has made Jaho his confidence or his security. Happy is the one who has not turned in the direction of those who are unreasonably defiant, or to those who fall victim to the lie. As you're going to find out tomorrow, it's very, very important that we not fall victim to the lie. That's what started this whole problem. The lie. Our final verse, verse 5, Greek text of Psalm chapter 39, chapter 40 in the Hebrew text. Happy is the man or woman, right? By man, it does not mean to exclude women, right? Like when it says, like in many texts, the man who does this will be guilty of something, right? Well, the same is true of a woman, right? It's just the way the Bible talks. The Bible puts more negativity on texts involving things happening to men than anybody else. And that's just a consequence of the way that men were viewed as being more responsible for what took place in the lives of people at this time. Happy is the man whose hope is in the name of Lord Jaho. And happy is the one who does not even consider vain pursuits and obvious liars or wild liars. Obvious liars. Something that's obvious. It's very obvious that's a lie. How is something obvious? How is one lie obvious and another not? We're going to talk about it tomorrow. But I think we can all agree. Then when we have knowledge of something, and then we're told that the opposite is true, someone is lying, or they're just telling us what's false. And by just, I don't mean to minimize it, but people can tell you something that's false without knowing it, and people can tell you something that's false knowing it. Or, but the intent can be different than someone who's obviously lying to you. The intent could be to get you to believe what they want you to believe, or someone can lie to you with the suspicion something is really not true, but want you to believe it for the benefit of the group, right? That's what we're going to talk about a lot tomorrow in some ways, because I think really part of the problem that many groups and many individuals have is that I don't want to say we don't care about the truth or that certain groups don't care about the truth, because that wouldn't be true. I think probably every single one of us would certainly say and probably do care about the truth. I'm just not so sure we care about it as much as we care about other things. And so even though we might see something as true, we might care about it being true, we still might not do it because of our valuing something we want more. And when that happens, that's your reward. That's all anyone could expect to ever get. At least when it comes to the Bible, because everyone who's on the side of the truth listens to Jesus' voice. Jesus tells us we're to sacrifice everything if we have to, like he did, if we really listen to his voice. And while we can't do it as good as he did, we all know and believe if you're someone like me, Christian witness of Jaho, Jehovah's Witness, the Father is looking for people to worship him with spirit and truth. That's what Jesus said in John 4. Both groups teach and believe that and use it regularly. It doesn't say anything else. It doesn't say the Father's looking for someone to worship him with a bunch of people. The Father's looking for someone to worship him by putting that person's family first. The Father's looking for someone to worship him in a church building. It says in spirit and in truth. Jesus says in John 18, where two or more are gathered in my name, there I am. Where are we getting this idea is what I'm going to get into tomorrow. Other than from texts like, do not forsake the gathering of yourselves together, which we all know we shouldn't do. Right? If you had a group of Christians living next to you, why wouldn't you want to get together with them as often as you could? Would you use that to make it a requirement? Hey, if you don't meet with us on this night, then we're not going to associate with you. Or wouldn't you just associate with them as often as they could associate with you? You'd each make it a priority and do it to the extent that you can, knowing that when you do so, you can share the emblems. You can proclaim the coming of the Lord. Or do you just do it so that you can say you did it and benefit from having been with other people who value that same thing more than whether something is true too? Yeah, we can all agree on whether or not something is true or disagree. But I don't think there's any way any of us, or all of us, certainly, some of us might, could disagree that a lot of us, maybe most of us, are actually valuing things more than the truth, while simultaneously claim we have the truth. We'll talk about it more tomorrow. I'll try to be as generous and fair to groups like the Watchtower, to myself and others as I can. Nobody's perfect. Some make claims that are bigger than others, more significant than others, carry a much greater consequence than others, and we do need to talk about that. Especially if so many people are going to